This is such incredible research. There's so much good stuff. Social media is replacing a lot of the time that we spend with other people. We've really elevated convenience over connection. We end up feeling connected online, but it's sort of like empty calories. Oh my gosh, I'm addicted to my device. Technology allows us to do so many things without ever interacting with another human being. I already had all my conversations with AI on the way home, and I didn't have anything to talk to my wife about. There's also wonderful research on productivity. We want to be authors of our destiny. What do places do that can affect our brain chemistry? We pick up energy from each other. That is the sweet spot. Like, how do we create a neighborhood for a team? There is a measurable talent spillover. When we have less of that opportunity in the office together, that also can create this sense of disconnection. And they would bring people in who had benefited from the drugs that they had innovated, and they would tell their stories. And it was just the most powerful thing, because that's where you felt like your work was really connecting to real people who were benefiting from it.
What if the biggest problem facing the modern workplace isn't productivity, performance, or even flexibility, but loneliness? And what if the office, the building, and the spaces we design could actually be part of the solution? Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, the show where we explore how work, the workplace, and the world around it are evolving. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, founder of Work Design, and in each episode, we talk with the experts shaping the future of work about what's driving change and what that means for all of us. If you care about our work environment and how it's enabling organizations to grow, scale, and actually think better, please share this with others who may benefit, and then subscribe and join the conversation. Today, I'm joined by Tracy Brower, Vice President of Workplace Insights at Steelcase, a sociologist, researcher, and one of the more thoughtful voices on connection, belonging, and the future of work. Tracy's research has shaped how organizations around the world think about happiness, purpose, and community, and she's been writing about these issues for years. She's just released her latest book called Critical Connections: Build Relationships and Harness the Power of Community in Work and Life. The book takes on the loneliness epidemic head on, exploring why we feel so disconnected and how work has become one of our most important sources of community, and what it takes to build meaningful relationships in a world shaped by technology, hybrid work, and now AI. So today we're going to have a little bit of fun, talk about proximity, place, friendship, and the power of the built environment, and why the office may matter more than we think. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm excited to have you here. Before we dive in, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at Steelcase.
Yeah, absolutely. So my PhD is in the sociology of work. So how we affect our work, how it affects us. I'm the Vice President of Workplace Insights for Steelcase, as you mentioned, and that gives me the amazing opportunity to take the research that Steelcase does and really share that with customers, with influencers, with potential customers, with lots of different audiences, and have dialogues like these where we're learning from each other. I also have the privilege of writing as senior contributor for Forbes and writing for Fast Company and other publications as well. And I so appreciate your work here, Bob, with Work Design. I mean, I just think it's such a critical voice for our industry and shaping and foundational for so many of us.
Thanks. It sounds like you're having a lot of fun. You opened Critical Connections by talking about the growing loneliness epidemic. Can you give us some insight into what's causing that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many things causing it. And I think there are three big ones. One is we've really elevated convenience over connection. Technology allows us to do so many things without ever interacting with another human being. We can grab a coffee because we've ordered through the app and not talk to the barista. We can avoid talking to the checkout person because we get the delivery at our door. We can check into our hotel with our mobile key and never interact with another human being. Those are all very convenient, but they're also more shaping in terms of our feelings of disconnection. The other thing that is happening is social media is replacing a lot of the time that we spend with other people. We end up feeling connected online, but it's sort of like empty calories because we're not really, even though we may have lots of connections, we don't really have somebody that we can call when we really, really need help. And so social media, while it makes us feel more connected in some ways, it may actually be causing disconnection in others. And I think the other thing really is the shifts in terms of our work experience. We know hybrid is here to stay. We know hybrid and remote work have wonderful value, and we can do great work in lots of different places. The office is so powerful, though, in terms of how it connects us, how it helps us to feel seen, how it helps us to make relationships more compelling with colleagues. And so when we have less of that opportunity in the office together, that also can create this sense of disconnection.
It's interesting. I hadn't really thought about, how much we actually interact with our devices as opposed to people, for ordering and checking out and, having deliveries made and things like that. It's kind of interesting the way that plays out.
It is. It's so interesting the way it plays out. And I think that sometimes I think we can beat ourselves up for saying, oh my gosh, I'm addicted to my device or I can't live without my device. But partly it's sort of not our fault, right? Because there's so much on our device that's so helpful. Even if we're traveling and we need to know which gate to go to next or when our next flight is, going to be departing, there's so much that we get on our devices because we have the information at our fingertips.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it there while you were talking about how the workplace has become such a critical source for us, in terms of belonging. Can you share some insights into how that is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the research on belonging suggests that we don't get a sense of belonging just from being with other people. We get a sense of belonging from a shared sense of social identity, from a shared sense of goals, from mutual objectives, from a purpose that we share. In fact, there's some brilliant research that when we have a greater sense of purpose, we are less likely to say that we are lonely. So, there's also a statistical relationship between purpose and loneliness. So work takes on a really important role because we show up, we are seen by our colleagues, we feel connected to a community of people who are depending on us. People, care about our deliverable and our performance and how we're doing in terms of how we're able to make a contribution. So especially in lieu of some of those other things, right? We talked about all the places where we're no longer connecting. Work ends up being a center of gravity. Work ends up being a catalyst for so many of the connections that we need that we're not getting in other places.
You make that workplace sound very important. So, how do we inspire people to get back to the workplace as opposed to issuing mandates and ordering people back?
Yeah, exactly. I think we've got to figure this out. I think part of the challenge is that we end up in this dialogue about, who and when and where, like who's got to show up and what days are they going to be there, which is very logistical, right? It's relevant and important, but very logistical. I think we can bump that up and talk more about the why of why the office is important. Why would we come anyway? And sometimes we think about things like faster decision making or more focus on customers or, better collaboration. But those still feel pretty corporate, right? Pretty organizational. Those are benefits for the organization. I think we can bump that conversation up even one level higher and talk about why is the office great for people? We know flexibility is also great. We know hybrid work is here to stay. And when people are in the office, they can learn and grow. They report more learning and more growth. When people are in the office, it contributes to performance, which contributes to our esteem when we have great places to support our work and proximity to our people. We can talk about the benefits of the office in terms of connecting with others and building friendships and building collegial relationships. So, of course, the logistical layer is important and the organizational why. And then I think, too, the personal why in terms of all the things the office can do for us as individuals and teams.
Just thinking from an organizational perspective, leadership is really important. So how can they support, building and sustaining relationships?
Yeah, leaders are the linchpin. They always are, right? And one of the things I always like to say is that leaders aren't responsible for our well-being or our mental health, but they are responsible to create the conditions for relationships, for community, for mental health, for feeling, a sense of esteem about our performance. So one of the things that leaders can do is really model the way. I heard somebody say to me one time, which I thought was just brilliant, you can't delegate relationships. And so when leaders have strong relationships, when leaders take time to be in community, when leaders take time to connect meaningfully, those make a difference because we tend to over index on the behavior of leaders and we see what they're doing and we hear what they're saying. And then we tend to be compelled toward those behaviors as well. That's one. So modeling the way. Another thing is that I think leaders can be present and accessible for people. Statistically, when leaders are present and accessible, that translates significantly to greater trust and greater performance. Leaders can also be predictable, like we prefer people who are legible, who we can read. There was a really interesting experiment where people were given the opportunity to be reporting to a leader who was always great or reporting to a leader who was always very poor or reporting to a leader who was erratic. And of course, people preferred the good leader, right? But given the choice between a leader that was always poor versus a leader that was erratic, people chose the leader that was more predictable because they knew what to expect, right? So leaders can also be predictable and they can give people a sense of continuity in terms of their behavior and what people can expect from them. And then I think the other thing that leaders can do is help people to build relationships across the team. So it's not just about my relationship with my leader. It's also the relationship I have with my team. And the other thing leaders can do is give people meaningful work that they can do across departments, across teams. Sometimes we believe that the best team building comes and the best belonging comes when we are doing social activities together. So escape rooms or, making pasta as a team. Those are great. But what matters even more is when we roll up sleeves together and do really good work together.
Well, the other thing I think that's important for leaders is to inspire the people in the organization and give them a clear sense of direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Purpose is absolutely key. In fact, when you look at the data around really great cultures, one of the things that we need from a really great culture is mission, vision, and direction. We want strong leaders who inspire us with a shared sense of purpose. A second thing that we need is a really great opportunity for involvement and participation. We want to be authors of our destiny. We want both strong leadership and the opportunity to influence. The other thing that we need in a great culture is clarity about expectations, clear swim lanes, ways to deal with conflict that naturally comes up, right? And how we can constructively work through disagreements. And then the other thing we need is a really great sense of adaptability, resilience. We learn from the market, we learn from each other, we learn from our competitors and our customers. So we have both consistency and we have adaptability. And all of those things are areas that leaders can not only demonstrate themselves, but really foster across the organization.
You just wrote a great article that we just published in Work Design about the power of proximity. You gave a whole series of different things that proximity can do for people. So, I mean, what does the research actually show happens when people are physically near each other?
This is such incredible research. There's so much good stuff. So we have to pick and choose what we talk about. But otherwise, we could talk for, 3 hours. One of the things that we know from physical presence and proximity is that there is a measurable talent spillover. So if you sit within 25 feet of a top performer, your performance increases 15%. So talent spills over. There is also a measurable knowledge spillover. When we sit within 65 feet of other people, there's that knowledge spillover, right? That's because we're asking for advice. We're asking for input. We're providing coaching. We're able to overhear and learn from each other. There is also measurable spillover on engagement. When people around us are more engaged, we also tend to be more engaged. That is especially true when there is high frequency of communication, which is no big surprise. surprised that that would be part of the formula. There's also wonderful research on productivity. There was a meta-analysis that looked at a number of different studies and found that average increase in productivity when people worked in proximity together was 12%. And there was another very cool study where they asked people when they were present together in the office to please provide more coaching to each other. That was the intervention, was toward coaching. Not surprisingly, more coaching turned into more knowledge sharing, because what is coaching but lots of great knowledge sharing, right? So coaching led to knowledge sharing, and more knowledge sharing led to a 15% increase in sales. So it was just really, really measurable in terms of that ability to ask questions and get guidance and get input. But here is the frosting on that particular study. They looked 20 weeks later after the intervention initially to see, okay, what's going on? Are we still seeing a, is the needle still getting a bump in terms of the outcome? And it was 20 weeks later, there was still that increase in sales in terms of the intervention toward coaching and knowledge sharing paying off even that much later.
Wow, that's great. We talk a lot about weak ties and strong ties and diverse networks that contribute to happiness and innovation. So, how does that work as opposed to the proximity? We've got people that are weak ties that may not be so close to us.
Yes, this is really interesting sociological research. So we can think about our relationships in concentric circles. So the people that are closest to us, our 2 or 3 closest people, our 5 next closest people, our 10 most close relationships. Furthest out in that set of concentric circles are the weak ties. Those are people that we know well enough to stay in touch with, but we maybe don't stay in touch as frequently. And weak ties, statistically, contribute most to when we have a new opportunity, a new job, a promotion, a new project that we get to be part of. Part of the reason for that is that by definition, people who are our ties have access to information that we and our closer ties don't have ourselves. They're further out in our network, so they just have access to different information. So weak ties are really important to maintain over time, and they're really important to new opportunities, especially. And so it's about kind of staying in touch with lots of people and making the right kinds of investments, whether those are deeper investments for closer ties or maybe less frequent investments for weaker ties.
So, I'm wondering, I mean, is there a balance between people who are like us and people who are different for that diversity? And how does that play into, the community?
Yes. Oh, this is so interesting, right? As human beings, we prefer homophily. Homophily is we're attracted kind of more automatically to people who might look like us or sound like us or think like us. We're kind of attracted, birds of a feather stick together, to people who are more similar. That's kind of our automatic modus operandi. However, there is also data about when you have about 50% of your network that is diverse, different from you, you will reach the higher levels of happiness. So the sweet spot in terms of our networks, our connections, our relationships is to have about 50% of our network that is similar to us and about 50% of our network who is different from us. And so that mixture of people who are both sort of speaking the same language as us, literally and figuratively, and people who can positively provoke and offer new ideas and different points of view are important. And the way that the workplace relates to that is that many times people say that they make their more diverse friends at work. In fact, there's a study that suggests that 81% of people say that they make their more diverse friends at work. Because in your personal life, you may be, with the people who are more like you, but at work, you're thrown onto the project team or you're, working together on the customer presentation or you're working together to innovate the new product. And those kinds of situations put us into contact with people who might be more different from us. The other thing is that there's some great research on innovation. They looked at cities that were the most innovative in terms of the number of patents and the number of new innovations that came to the market. And they found that when cities had more diversity and more diverse people in proximity to each other, they tended to see greater output in terms of innovation. So it works at both the workplace level and even cities and community level.
Well, I would think innovation is one of those things where you need to have a diversity of ideas. You need to be exposed to other perspectives on how people think. And then that causes you to think differently. And that's, I would think, where the innovation occurs. So it's almost in those areas between, different disciplines.
Yes, precisely. In fact, there was another study they did with MIT, and they looked at the number of papers published by academicians, the number of citations on those papers, which is a really good metric of how credible and how much gravitas a paper had. And they looked at geolocation, and they found that when the academicians, the professors, the researchers were in greater community and greater proximity to people in different departments and from different disciplines, that boosted the number of papers that were published and the number of citations. So it's exactly your point, right? Like we think we put our diverse ideas together and we come out with something new. That's not rocket science, but the idea of how we flow through our spaces and how we interact is really, really compelling.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great segue because I think most of our audience is probably involved with putting space and workplaces, the physical environment together. You've talked about the powerful signals that the work environment can put out. What are those signals and how can we reinforce those?
Yeah, I think that the signals that we need to think about are the ways that we communicate how we work. And I think there's a really interesting concept of place literacy. Lots of us who work in places, we're literate about it. Like we notice, it's this thing that I really loved about that hotel lobby, or it's that thing that really attracted me back to that restaurant, or it's that aspect of my work experience that's energizing me. We may have high levels of place literacy, but many users aren't thinking as consciously about place. They just know what works for them and where they want to be. And so some of those signals are things like how many spaces we have for collaboration, which send us a message of how we work together, how many spaces we have that support our heads down work or our alone work that send signals about the extent to which we're supporting focus, the extent to which we have biophilia or daylight or views, which may send us some messages about an emphasis on well-being. Places for community, like city centers, for example, may send us messages about our shared sense of purpose or the energy that we bring to our work together. Those are some of the signals that we can think about in terms of spaces that may or may not be conscious for us, but definitely send a message about how we work together and what we value. You can even think about technology, right? To what extent technology is embedded and is easy to use with less friction. That sends us messages about the extent to which the organization is investing in making our performance, enabling our performance, empowering our performance.
Well, I've always felt that space communicates to us. We walk in, all of our senses are firing. We're absorbing everything that we see and hear and smell in that experience. So, how do we communicate those messages in a way that is going to help build those relationships?
Yeah, I think we communicate the messages based on having plenty of variety of spaces, right? So places for focus, places for collaboration, places for learning, places for rejuvenation, places for socializing. When we have a variety of places, people can find what they need in the place based on the different kind of work that they're doing. So having that variety, I think, sends a really important message. I think the presence of well-being spaces that help us to have that sense of well-being send a really important message about how we care about people and for people. Places where leaders are in proximity send us a really important message about the accessibility of leadership and the importance of how leaders interact with people. All of those kinds of things can send important messages for people.
Well, and I often feel like the culture of the organization is communicated often through the artifacts that people may place on their desk.
Yes, absolutely. It's that coffee table book in the conference room, that the founder wrote, right? It's the amazing products that the company manufactures or designs. There was another wonderful example. We were working with a pharma organization, and they were creating drugs that were saving lives in some really new ways. And they had this really interesting space. It was almost like a theater in the round, and they would bring people in who had benefited from the drugs that they had innovated, and they would tell their stories. And it was just the most powerful thing. And so it was powerful when everybody was in this sort of theater in the round space and hearing the stories. But then the space also took on its own importance as you walked through, as you were in proximity to the space, even when it wasn't being used, because that's where you felt like your work was really connecting to real people who were benefiting from it. So those artifacts and those opportunities for us to have the space demonstrate business literacy, have the space demonstrate purpose, have the space remind us of how our work matters.
You've talked about the vertical separation without isolation. And can you talk a little bit about why that matters and the psychological aspect of it?
Yeah, this is really an interesting experiment where the experiment looked at spaces that were more neighborhood like and then had vertical separation versus spaces that were all open, like a bullpen kind of configuration. And people actually interacted more when they had some vertical separation of the space. What it was doing was creating a sense of territory for the team, like it became more team oriented space versus just feeling like it was kind of out in the open. So it gave team identity. That was one. It provided that sense of territory. So people felt like, there's a place for me here. So it gave a sense of individual territory. The other thing that it did is it really fostered communication. One of the things that happened in the space that was completely open is that people were actually less likely to interact because they didn't want to be overheard or they didn't want to interrupt others. But with more vertical separation of space, teams felt more free to interact together. And the other thing that happened with the vertical separation of space was that there was space for residual kind of artifacts of the work, right? Like our project plan and our post-it notes and that whiteboard discussion we had about how we were going to solve the problem. And the vertical separation fostered stand-up meetings as well. So we could kind of gather around the whiteboard and solve the problem that was hot right now. That vertical separation did lots of work, but it created that sense of psychological belonging, psychological safety, and it fostered the interaction most of all.
You've got me thinking about the range. I'll call it the range of vertical separation. So I don't think we want to be in cube farms with high panels, and we probably don't want to be in an open environment. So is there a sweet spot for vertical separation within a space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're focused on community based design and how we think about community as an analogy for the office and all the different kinds of settings that come along with the community, like city centers or university districts for learning or business districts where we come together across departments or urban parks where we feel that sense of kind of opportunity to connect in a more informal way, but in a way that's feeding us from a biophilic standpoint. And then neighborhoods are the other setting that are really critical in community-based design. So that is the sweet spot. Like, how do we create a neighborhood for a team? We might have space that's more sort of public. We might have space that's privileged and private within that neighborhood environment. But then within the neighborhood environment, we also have some vertical delineation of space. So you feel like you're together with your team. We're not in a cube farm where we're each in our, high walled workstation, but we are in a neighborhood where we feel that togetherness as a team and we have that opportunity to kind of share information that's team specific and learn from each other in a team specific way.
For years, I think we've been looking at cafe and shared neighborhood community spaces, the common spaces, I think, within an office. How does that contribute to the relationships and the interaction that people have?
Yeah, those community spaces are really, really important and definitely contribute significantly. Partly it's the ability to kind of move out of my neighborhood when I want to and go to that more work cafe or city center space, if you will. That space works really well too when it has its own variety. Like there might be a booth setting over here or a, table setting over there. There might be a little bit of vertical separation of space in that city center area. But the really big thing that city center areas do for us and community spaces do for us is they give us the opportunity to gather. And there's also some wonderful research on gathering. The research was actually on cities and communities, not on workplaces. So we're relating the research, but in cities and communities, when there were more gathering spaces, people reported they had more friends and they were less likely to report they did not have friends. Gathering spaces were parks, park benches, yoga studios, restaurants, coffee shops, community centers, libraries. When people had more places to gather, they had more friends and higher levels of well-being. The other research here is on gathering, looked at cities and communities and their investment in the public good. That meant investment in sidewalks, bridges, trains, roadways, ways that people were able to connect. And when there were more connection spaces and avenues for connection, people reported higher levels of happiness and well-being. So you think about, how we flow through the office, the way that the office brings us together, the places that become destinations for the team, or the places that become destinations for the mentorship conversation that we're going to schedule with each other. Those actually move the needle as well in terms of well-being and happiness and the way that we're able to contribute together.
And I would guess that's where the furniture begins to play a big part. And probably what you're studying at Steelcase is how the furniture can influence whether people connect or avoid
Yes.
each other.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That sends us signals as well. Like it's so easy to tell, ooh, this space is designed for individual work, or this space is designed for a couple of people to get together or a larger group to get together. Those two are signals and cues in terms of how we interact. I mean, it's the old Winston Churchill saying that we all know and love, right? First we create our spaces and then they shape us. So it's definitely a reciprocal relationship in terms of how we shape space and then how it affects our behavior. We always like to say, too, place shapes behavior, and behavior over time is culture.
So if I go back to the beginning of this conversation where we're all interacting with our devices, can the space influence that in terms of whether we put the devices down or whether we're, interacting with them more?
Yeah, yeah, this is great. I did a roundtable with a number of design principals and founders, and this woman spoke up and she said, I want to create spaces that make people want to put down their devices, which I just thought was so brilliant, right? We're so conditioned toward our devices and toward the dopamine hit we get, right? And the way that it affects our brain chemistry. So what do places do that can affect our brain chemistry as well? Places that engage us, places that are interesting and stimulating, whether that's texture or color or a surprising landmark, those make a difference. Another thing that makes a difference in places is natural elements. We all know the biophilia research backward and forward, but nature also connects us. We tend to feel more connected to others in nature. We also, when we feel a sense of awe that is inspired by nature, that can also give us a greater sense of well-being. So those make a difference. I think the other thing that can make us want to put down our devices is when we're in places that have attracted other people, because some of what's most interesting about the space is the space itself, but also the people in the space. So of course I'm going to set down my device if I run into a good friend or I run into a colleague, or my gosh, we are going to solve a problem together. Those are some of the ways that we can create spaces that are especially compelling. I think the other thing that can help us kind of put down our devices is when spaces really help us to perform well. Because when we perform well, it contributes to our esteem. And so when places are able to really support performance brilliantly, it really helps us to kind of put away the distraction and really get down to business.
I think we live in a world where we've got a large percentage of people who are participating virtually in some way. And how should the technology and the space work together? Can we bring that together instead of having to compete against each other?
Yeah, this is such a good point. I mean, one of the things we know is that work has changed, and so the workplace needs to change as well. What is it, like 80% of meetings today have at least one remote participant? So we need to be able to have spaces that allow for great technological interface, and we need to have places that are technologically enabled that reduce friction, right? So it's easy and it's maybe the same every time in terms of how we connect. I think the other thing is that we need to have technology that's pretty ubiquitous. Like I may not be able to book a certain room that day, but if I book the other room, I need to know that the technology is there. I think the other thing that we can do is think about our practices as it relates to technology. It's partly about the place and the technology, but it's also around how are we interacting with each other using the technology. We can think about the issue of presence equity. So how are we making sure that we include the people who might not be in the room in the pre-conversation or the post-conversation, or making sure they can see the display? That presence equity is also an important part of the norms that we establish in terms of how we work together when we're in a hybrid meeting situation.
We've recently had Warren Wright and Amanda Schneider, who both spend a lot of time in the generational research and understanding how different generations interact. I'm wondering what you're seeing in your research and how workplaces might need to adapt to that.
Oh, this is such a big one. There was a nationwide study, and in that nationwide study, 98% of Gen Zs said that they feel burned out. I mean, it's just like incredible, right? Like, in what ways are we supporting our youngest generations and then coming up on Gen Alpha, right? And in what ways can we raise our resilience? And so we know that the youngest generations are the generations who most want to come to the office. Our Steelcase research suggests that 77% of Gen Zs want to be in the office. It's kind of a myth that youngest generations really just want to do remote work. And the number one things they want from the office are mentoring and coaching, access to leaders, opportunities to build their careers. We all care about those things, but those are some of the highest priorities for the youngest generations. So when we are able to create spaces where generations come together, that's a really big deal. When we are able to create mentorship programs that are pairing, obviously, generations together to learn from each other, that goes a long way. When we have buddy programs for new hires coming in, that makes a really big difference in terms of retention. When we have people sitting in neighborhoods and they can overhear the more senior member of the group and kind of learn from that, that makes a difference. When we have enclaves where we can have private conversations and younger generations can maybe ask for advice from more senior generations in a private environment, all of those make a difference in terms of how we create the conditions for those relationships to be fostered and nurtured across the generation. And I think we need to be careful and stop short of saying that, certain generations want certain kinds of workplaces. We talked earlier about variety. We all need different kinds of settings to be successful with the different kinds of work we're doing. And so some of that is less generationally oriented and more oriented toward creating enough variety that no matter who we are and no matter how old we are, we have the spaces that support our work best.
I'm thinking as I'm listening to you that the importance of being physically together brings out a much better level of performance. And I'm thinking a lot of that has to do with the body language, the reactions that we have, eye contact, stuff that might not get communicated in a virtual way. So, I'm wondering if those things are helping to shape the relationships that we have with people.
Yes, 100%. In fact, I talked earlier about all those studies about presence and productivity, and a lot of the meta analysis suggests that part of the reason for better performance when we're together has to do with social norms and appropriate peer pressure. That we see somebody that's, working hard and that motivates us to work hard. There's a concept sociologically called collective effervescence, which is sort of like emotional contagion. Literally, it's something you can measure. We pick up energy from each other. We are able to really pick up on the engagement and the performance of others. So that's about the social norm that we see toward performance. It's about the peer pressure toward performance. It's about the spillover of engagement that we talked about. But it also has to do with empathy and it has to do with social skills. We are more empathetic when we're around more people because we're tuning in to what they might be going through. We build our social skills by listening to other people, interacting with other people, kind of getting practice, if you will, over and over again in terms of how we interact and how our words are landing, how our behaviors are landing. All of those require a level of proximity and presence so that we are leaning into relationships, getting feedback from relationships, and building relationships in the process.
All right. So I've got to ask you about the elephant in the room that I guess everybody's talking about today is AI and what that might be in the future. But what's our relationship with AI going to be like?
What is our relationship with AI going to be like? What is it already? This is something we're probably all losing sleep about. I talked to a principal at one of our largest design firms in the nation, and she said, every conversation turns into an AI conversation because it's so top of mind right now. I think we're in a really interesting place. One of the challenges today is that people are using AI in some cases to replace human relationships. And that is causing mental health issues. So when AI is helping us to get a project done or be more efficient, that's sort of one thing. But when we start to use AI as our friend or try to fill in the gaps in terms of a relationship and interact with AI instead of real people, that is what will get us into trouble. There's literally a condition called AI psychosis, where people start to believe that they're in a meaningful relationship with their AI, and they start to reduce the amount of connections they have with real people. The other thing is there's some really important research about how AI changes the way we think. When we use AI too much, we do less higher order thinking skills like generative, like analytical, like developmentally oriented thinking. And when we offload too much of that kind of thinking to AI, we're doing less of it ourselves. The other thing that's interesting is there is research that when we use AI more versus less, we become dependent and we start to trust our own ideas less. We feel like we have to go to AI for all of our new ideas or all of our writing or all of the, feedback on a project that we're working on. And so to the extent that our relationship skills decline, to the extent that our thinking skills change, to the extent that we establish more dependency, that can be really, really negative in terms of our sense of esteem as well as our sense of connectedness. So I think we need to be smart about how we're using AI. This isn't like we're not Luddites, right? We're not saying we're never going to use AI, but I do think we need to be really intentional about how we use it and in what ways we are still ensuring that we're doing enough of our own thinking and our own connecting.
Well, I'm thinking AI compliments me on virtually everything I do, and you'd think I was like chosen by God or something. I don't get that from my colleagues.
I know it's true. Like just dispense with the lovely smoke that you're blowing, right? That's really good. It's really interesting. I was talking to a gentleman and he said, "Oh my gosh, I use my AI all the time. I talk because he's using lots of verbal AI. So on his commute in the morning, every morning he's talking through his ideas with his AI buddy, and on the way home every night he's talking to his AI buddy about his ideas and they're developing ideas. But he said, I realized that I was talking too much to my AI buddy and I wasn't sharing as many of my ideas with colleagues and with young talent at my firm. And then he said the same on the way home. He said, I'd already had all my conversations with AI on the way home and I didn't have anything to talk to my wife about anymore. Right. So he was realizing like, yes, there's value in getting feedback and AI helping us think about our thinking, but he wanted to be really judicious about how he ensured that he was still doing that thinking out loud, that processing, that conversation with real people in the real world.
AI is affecting all of us to some degree. And are there things that we can do or conversations that we should have to help us balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need guardrails on AI. I think we need to decide what feels really core to us that we might choose to use AI for or not. I love to write. It's part of like who I am and how I think and how I process. So I never use AI to help me write. On the other hand, there's a teammate that I have who says writing is terrible for me. I've always been, not what I wanted to be in terms of my writing. I use AI to help me write all the time. For him, the work that he does is very analytical. He does lots in terms of analysis of surveys and data. And he says that is what he loves to do. And so he doesn't use AI as much for that. So it's a choice making in terms of what's most important to us and how we feel and what we feel is core to us that I think we can use to be intentional about selecting how we use AI. And I think the other really important thing about AI and work is all about identity. Like, we get a healthy sense of identity from the work that we do. We get a healthy sense of identity from what we contribute professionally. We also get identity from family and friends and volunteer work and community, but work is part of our identity as well in a constructive and appropriate way. And if AI replaces a lot of the things that we're used to doing and a lot of the ways that we're used to adding value, that might challenge our identity a little bit. So I think we also need to be really aware and really appreciative of the value that we're bringing and how that value evolves over time so that we can keep our skills up, so that we can keep contributing, and so that we continue to feel like we've got that sense of identity, even if AI replaces some of the tasks that we do.
Yeah, a while back we had Caitlin Begg on, and she describes herself as a socio-technologist and our relationship with our phones and headphones and how those things affect the way that we interact with others, at work. So that was a lot of fun. But I'm thinking your next book ought to be on our relationship with AI.
Exactly, exactly. I think we have a lot of work to do there. There's have you seen that new pendant you can wear? It's called Friends, or it's called Friend, where it's a pendant you wear and then it will track you, like it knows that you just stopped at the food truck and you're eating a burrito. It knows that you're watching a, streaming movie on such and such. So it will text you and say, "Oh, how's your burrito?" Or, "Hey, that was quite the scene," right? So all of a sudden you're interacting with your friend pendant instead of your real people. This is socio technology, right? Like, that's a parasocial relationship. It is not an authentically social relationship. It is a parasocial relationship. And we need to be really careful about that if that's replacing relationships in the real world. How much better would it have been to be sharing the burrito with a friend and watching the movie together, right? And if we don't have those opportunities, that will contribute to loneliness and disconnection for sure.
Well, I'm just thinking that that is not black and white. That's something that is very gray, and that there would be a lot of different interactions and interpretations of how those relationships evolve.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we have different levels of comfort and need for how much social time we have. Like, when we think about critical connections, it's not just about making everybody into an extrovert. Some of us need less frequency and depth of communication, but we all need some. It's absolutely having friends, having close relationships is correlated with physical and cognitive and emotional well-being.
So let me tie this back to the workplace. For somebody that's starting out and considering a new work environment and the importance of connections and community, how would you advise them?
I
Where do they
think we
begin?
I think we need to think about what people need at an individual and a team and an organizational level, and really making sure that there's room for people to focus and do work on their own. When we have the opportunity for enough privacy and space, we are better in community. So I think we need to think about that element. And then I think we also want to think about gathering spaces. Where are the places where we will come together, either for relational interaction or task interaction or both, and really think about kind of that community based design concept. How do we create city centers where we can see and be seen in a broader space together? How do we design business districts where we can connect across departments and get projects done? How do we create university districts where we're learning together and we're emphasizing growth and career development and skill development for the organization? In what ways do we create urban parks where we can be together in a, sort of comfortable space where we can connect more informally or serendipitously? And how do we create neighborhoods that allow for flexibility? We can flow between the different kinds of work we need to do, from a phone booth to an enclave to a coffee area to our neighborhood. How do we create neighborhoods that are the right size for teams and allow us to flow, but also allow us to find our people and be in community with the people that we're working closest with on an ongoing basis? So I think those are some of the things that we can think about in terms of just the archetypes of space or the settings that will help us consider the needs for us to be working in lots of different kinds of ways.
So I'm thinking if we look ahead 5 years, 10 years, what kinds of things do we need to do to preserve human connection and keep the communities strong so that
Yeah.
we can grow and work and be healthy?
Yeah, I think the things we need to do to preserve connection are to create places where people really want to be, because that will be the thing that saves us. Is we want to be in community with each other. We feel rejuvenated when we're together. One of the primary contributors to mental health is feeling seen, and in increasing numbers of people are saying that they do not feel like the people that they work with care about them. And so I think part of the way that we ensure connection is that we ensure places where people want to be, because if we can attract people, then they attract more people to the place. I think we can also make sure that we have places where people can work together effectively, because we get such a boost in our esteem when we're able to perform well. Another thing that I think we can do is make sure that there's lots of opportunity for learning and growth, whether that's learning in a neighborhood side by side with our people, whether that's learning in a classroom environment, whether that's learning in an enclave. But learning and growth also contribute to community because they boost all of us, and then we can learn from each other. So I think those are also places that we can consider.
Yeah, no, this has been a great conversation. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that we've left out that we've missed that you think would be important to include?
I don't think so. I think, we've talked about so many different aspects of it, and there are so many aspects. No, I think we've talked about most of it. This is great.
Tell us about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Critical Connections, the publication is March 10. Super excited about that. I start out by talking about the challenges we have with loneliness and disconnection and isolation and well being issues for all generations, and especially our youngest generations. Then I talk about the power of connection and the power of community and how it actually returns significantly for us as individuals and teams and organizations. I talked about the power of place and presence and proximity. And then I really talk about how do we foster relationships? How do we build relationships? What are the dynamics of community? And why does community work the way that it does? So lots of wonderful, accessible research, and then lots of very pragmatic recommendations about how we really build relationships and belonging in our disconnected world, and how we kind of come back together in community.
We will put a link to the book in the description below. But anyway, this has been great. Thank you very much. I've totally enjoyed the conversation. I think I'm overwhelmed with all of the different social interaction aspects that we've gone through. And good luck with your book.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Super appreciate the conversation.